Well, Melissa, it's so great to have you joining me on the Nothing is Wasted podcast. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me, Davey. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, I would love for you to share with us a little bit about your life right now. What it is that you do. I know that we're going to talk about your story. You found yourself in a story and a life that you never would have expected, never would have invited. And yet you're here, you're in front of us. You seem to have the Holy Spirit all over you. You look great. And after we talk about your story, people are going to go, how in the world is she standing after what she's endured over the past couple of years? And so tell us a little bit about you right now, and then let's dive back and kind of talk about how you got here.
Sure. So right now, my first priority is being mom to my kids. As we're recording this, my son turned 15 yesterday, and we've done the driver's test and started driving. And so that's a whole new thing in our life. My daughter's 11, moving into middle school this year. And so it's lots of new and exciting and a little bit scary things, being a mom, and being a mom by myself right now. It's a lot anyway, but it's a lot, especially in that context. I'm a homeschool mom. We homeschool. So, my kids' education, a lot of it rests on my shoulders. We have some wonderful teachers who come alongside us and help us in some different ways. But, so I get to do that. I have the privilege of making sure my kids receive, a godly and quality education. Both of those things are important. And I work from home. So I'm working as a content specialist for our church and writing and helping communicate things with our church body and helping get information out the way it needs to go.
Wow.
So that's my big thing. We also have a dog whom I would be in really big trouble if I neglected to mention our English bulldog,
Part of the family.
Whose name is Emmett. Yes.
Right.
Oh, yes.
The family.
Yes.
I'm curious about this content. You said content specialist for your church. Tell me a little bit about that. What does that entail? I think that's super cool because I know a lot of churches are beginning to move in that direction right now, especially with everything being digital. Obviously, our organization is very much a digital content organization, along with the community and the coaching that we do. But tell me about that. What does that entail for you?
So it's a new position at our church, but we have a large church. And so, we have a lot of different ministries. We have a website that's constantly changing. We have emails that have to go out. And so I'm there to just help make sure that our ministries don't get bogged down with what they should say on a website. How should I say this? What should I say? Well, they can give me the information and I can help take that load off of them, and also help make sure that our vocabulary and our language is consistent throughout. And we're saying the things that we need to say in the way that we need to say them so that we're consistent across the board.
Wow. That's great. That's an incredible position. And obviously I geek out over that stuff because that's something we're inundated in all the time. Right. And we're listening to people who are doing it well. And we're thinking about branding. We're thinking about, how do we say this in a way that is cohesive, that is clear, that is simple, that is helping people get from point A to point B in their spiritual journey quicker? Because, you've probably heard this before. Donald Miller says, if you confuse, you lose. And I think that's true in church world. I think that's true in ministry. I think that's across the board. And so I love what you're doing. That's a really, really cool thing. I could sit and talk to you about that for an hour, but that's not why we're here. We're not talking about that. I want to talk about your story. I want to talk about what has happened because you and your husband were very involved with this church, prior to what you're doing right now. And you have quite a story of loss. So why don't you back up and talk to us a little bit about what's taking place in your life, and we'll talk about how God's shown up in that.
Yeah. So Chris and I got married in 1998. We're ancient. We're old.
I would have never known that. Honestly, you didn't have to tell us that. People were watching on YouTube. They're like, how in the world? There's no way.
Yeah. Well, we were babies. We'll just say that. But we began ministry even together, even before we were married. And so we were working together in ministry. And so he was a student pastor and I was right there with him, as the student admin for the first little while after we married. And so we always did ministry together wherever we were, whatever we were doing. It might look a little different, but we were always side by side together. Whatever we were doing, it was together. We liked each other. Like, not only did we like love each other, but we actually liked each
friends,
other.
right?
We were best friends. We hung out together. We had date night. The best date nights for us was like TV on the couch after the kids were in the bed, like that was just our thing.
That's awesome.
We would just rather be with each other doing nothing than to be out trying to, find other things to do. Yeah. And so, so that took us all over the place, over the nearly 23 years we were married. And so we ended up here in Nashville. Chris was working at Lifeway. And then we were already going to Long Hollow when a new pastor came and asked him to come on board there. And so that was a no-brainer for us. Like, oh my gosh, we get to step back into full-time ministry at the place where we already love and are invested. And so that was a gift to get to do that. The last 5 or so years of our ministry together, working in discipleship and helping other churches even learn how to make disciples who make disciples.
Wow.
And getting to partner with others in doing that. Yeah. So in 2019, I got a phone call that was shocking and that no one ever wants to get. And that was that my brother had been involved in an accident. And he was fishing with a friend. And Aaron, my brother, was always doing something with a buddy. Yeah. Aaron was the kind of guy who was helping somebody do something all the time. Mm-hmm. He was out fishing with a buddy, helping him learn how to use his new boat, and had some sort of medical emergency and fell into the water and could not be found. And they live where my parents are, is about 10 hours away from here, a drive. And so I'm sitting here on the side of my bathtub after I've just put my kids to bed going, I don't know what is happening. No one knew what was happening. We had no idea. But Aaron was with Jesus. I mean, that it became very apparent very quickly that Aaron was not coming back. And that was really the first up close and super personal grief that had hit our family. Now, we've lost other people before, but always in very different circumstances. My grandfather passed from Alzheimer's, and that was a long and arduous journey for our whole family. And so it's different when you have a guy who's 2 months away from his 31st birthday and he's just gone. Man. So that, for our whole family, I'm the oldest of 7 kids, and our family is, we're close. We give each other a hard time, but we're close. And so our family rallied at that time. We all came in, we all, gathered together, and it was hard because we had never done anything like that before. Yeah. But I think that the Lord allowed us to do it together well, and to allow one another to walk through it and grieve for Aaron in our own ways, and really learn a lot about grief through that process.
Man. Melissa, can we pause right there? something
Sure.
you just said really intrigued me, made me really curious. That you said the Lord allowed us to do it well. Can you bring some detail to that so we can, because that's a question we get often, is like, what does this look like? How do I do this well? And is there a way to qualify that? What did you mean when you said that?
I think, well, I mean, having a large family, like 7 kids, there are so many personalities and we all do things differently, right? If you have 2 kids in your home, you know that they are born wired together differently. And so everybody needs different things. Everybody processes differently. And so even as a large family with lots of different personalities and lots of different contexts for where we lived, the way we, how we do things in our daily lives, we were able to give each other the space and the grace to grieve the way we needed to grieve. And that was a gift to each of us. And also that my parents allowed that and encouraged that with us, because we did not feel pressure to have to feel a certain way or to have to do a certain thing. Yeah. 2 of my sisters got tattoos for Aaron, and there's a joke, when are you getting yours? But they know I will probably never do that. And that's okay.
That's okay.
But we've given each other the grace and the space to do what we need to do.
That's good. That's good. I think that's so important, especially, and what a great thing that you have such a huge family that you're able to demonstrate that really well, because, you find that people are at different paces in their grief journey, and not everybody's going to keep the same pace immediately at the very beginning, right? It feels like everybody's kind of at the same spot, but then very quickly it begins to diverge and everybody begins to go in their own direction, their own pace in grief. And that can get really frustrating, can become very tense, and it can often lead to some fracturing of families because of that. And so I love that you guys just recognized, hey, we've got to allow each other to do this at our own pace, do our own kind of thing. We can't project or presuppose our own journey onto someone else, even though we're walking through this, grieving the same person.
Yeah.
And that's imperative. I want to make sure that we underscore that for folks who are listening to this. So,
yes, that's been a huge blessing.
Go ahead.
Huge. That's been a huge blessing.
Yeah.
And several of us have kids. And so we all had small kids that we had to bring along in this grief journey. And so watching the kids talk about Uncle Aaron and realize, when we're gathered at Thanksgiving, we're not going to hear Uncle Aaron's truck coming down the driveway, and giving them the freedom to come and say, hey, we miss him, and giving them the ability to stop and pause and say, I just miss him. He's not here to play with us. He's not here to push us on the swing. Yeah. And then also giving ourselves the ability to maybe say something that he would have said, get in a little joke or a rib somewhere because he was that guy, and to be okay with like laughing about it and then having a tear later too.
Wow. Can I ask this too? Because, here, obviously we're going to find out as we're listening, folks who are listening to this, they're going to hear more of even, greater grief that you have walked through. But at this point, if you're able to think back, if I were to ask you the question, is it possible to do these kinds of family gatherings and still experience the fullest extent of joy and happiness, even with that empty seat at the table? What would you say? Because personally, our family is wrestling with this still, right? 7 years after losing my wife, it's like we get together with her side of the family, and it's still there's. It's like, man, it's still just there feel there's a empty seat, and there's just this for especially for several members of the family. It's like it doesn't feel as joyful as it used to, and we kind of wonder that. We're like, is this going to be possible? What does this look like? And I'm sure so many other people are wondering that too. I'm curious what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I think it will always be different because there's always somebody who's missing. Aaron's absence is felt at every family gathering. Now, with 7 kids and spouses and grandkids and extra people that we've kind of adopted into our family, you wouldn't think that with 40 people in the living room, one person's absence would be felt, but it is. And the important thing that I think my mom has led us in, my parents both have led us in and have allowed us to do, is to just say it. Man, I miss Aaron. And then to even honor him, like he was the great uncle. Like he would roll up and play with the kids and wrestle them around and stuff. And so when my mom does Christmas stockings every year, she puts a gift in Aaron's stocking that's for all the grandkids. Something simple like a movie that they would enjoy or something like that. But it is a way of keeping Aaron close and doing something special in his memory that we can all appreciate and love and say, oh, Aaron loved this movie. Now you guys get to enjoy this movie too.
Wow. Man, that's so good. Okay. So in the immediate aftermath of this, this is, you guys are sorting through the loss of your brother. That was in 2019, quite a bit happened in 2020 and then obviously in 2021 for you, but talk to me about the kind of the lead up to this next loss that you've experienced.
Yeah. So in 2021, we knew we had a crazy summer. Like it was one of those things where Chris and I were looking at the calendar and we were like, what in the world have we done to ourselves? Like, this is crazy. Yeah. We have a wedding across the country. We have camps. We have all of these things. What are we doing? And we had, initially decided that July was our month to like chill and be at home together. And that was just what we were going to do. And then a few weeks out, Chris said, you know what? You need to go to that wedding reception for your sister in Arkansas. I need to finish writing this book that I'm writing. So you guys just go. You and the kids go. I'll stay here. I'll finish this manuscript. And then when you guys get back, then we're done. We are done with all of our obligations. We can really just like chill as a family. And so that was our plan. July 5th, the morning after we'd, blown up fireworks and stayed up way too late and came home smelling like, firework dust and all of that stuff. The kids and I got up early. Chris got up with us and drove us to the airport. And the kids and I went to my mom's and we spent, the plan was to spend a whole week with our family, be there for my sister's wedding reception that she was having because she'd gotten married across the country and just really enjoy some time with our family. Chris was here writing, working, taking care of the brand new puppy that we had just gotten that he was having to potty train by himself.
Oh, man.
And, we talked, we FaceTimed, things were normal. And as much as I hate to use that word, things were just as they had been before. We've done this a ton of times, him here working, us there playing, FaceTiming, taking pictures, sending back and forth.
Yeah.
On Friday evening, about 5:50 or so, I got a call. And it was my doorbell. And I was thinking, my doorbell shouldn't be ringing right now. So I hopped on the cameras at my house, through the app. and could see a commotion going on outside our house. And I didn't know at the time, but it was Chris. There was an ambulance out in front of our house. There were neighbors everywhere. And I saw someone holding our puppy. And I knew that Chris was out there. And if someone else was holding our puppy, things were not good. And so through, convoluted, like calling different people and getting different calls and all of that kind of stuff, I managed to finally connect with the sheriff's deputy who was here. And he said, we don't really know what's going on right now, but your husband was found by the mailbox, non-responsive. And your neighbors found him and began CPR. And we have an ambulance here. We're taking him to the hospital. Where are you and can you get here? I was a 9-10 hour drive away.
Oh, goodness.
And so that just started the dominoes falling of what's going on? What's happening? Is he okay? How do I get home? Like, what do I tell my kids? What do we do? And the Lord in his graciousness had gone before us in so many ways, but through a series of events that I can't explain. Someone put us on a private plane and sent us home. And we landed here in our town just before midnight. And we were picked up and taken to the hospital where Chris was in CCU, unconscious, non-responsive. And after midnight, we show up to the hospital and there's a crowd of people waiting for us who've been there all evening with Chris, waiting for us. And through another series of miracles, the kids and I were both allowed to go in and see him that evening. And we couldn't stay. They only gave us a few minutes. But that was one of the hardest things I've ever done, is walk in that room, not knowing what I was going to see, not knowing anything that was going on, and to have my kids walk in there and see their dad, not knowing if they'd ever talk to him again. And so that began our next whatever, really. But really the next 10 days of intense craziness. There's no other way to describe what happened over the next 10 days other than just to say it was crazy.
Yeah. Man. So you guys were, obviously he was in critical care, and did you know immediately, did the doctors have any kind of answers immediately? What was going on? What had happened?
No. And in fact, we still don't have
couple of days.
Yeah. We still don't have a lot of answers. Our video camera, our doorbell camera, recorded Chris walking out the front door with our puppy Emmett, and it cut off when he got to the middle of the driveway. And it didn't record anything else that happened. Our camera that's on the front of the house that looks out into the street was scrambled. That is the only time of the day that video was scrambled, and we have no video recording of what happened. And at the time, I was pretty upset about that. But I recognize and realize that that was probably God's protection for us. Because the doctors, through all of the wonderful medical technologies that they have, all of the tests they were running, and they were they communicated very well with me. They kept us up to date. Thankfully, we were allowed in the hospital, with COVID and all of the crazy restrictions that had been going on. We were allowed in the hospital. I was allowed in the room. They were allowing my kids to come back and see Chris, which was, also a big deal. But they couldn't tell us what happened. They said all of our tests indicate that it was not this whole list of things. It was not a heart attack. It was not an aneurysm or a blood clot or, like a it was not any of these things. We cannot tell you what happened to him. We cannot tell you why he was lying on the ground beside your mailbox. We have no idea. Wow. And so they didn't know how long he had been without oxygen, how long it had been before the neighbor found him and began CPR, before any of the things. They had no idea. And so it was a watching and waiting. And through the tests that they ran again and again, it became very clear that he was not going to wake up.
Man. I can't imagine just the myriad of emotions that brought to you in those, those days as you're waiting for answers. And even now, not knowing what exactly happened. How is that for you, not having answers? How have you wrestled through that?
So this is going to sound really strange, but grief does this to us, and God works in mysterious ways,
Yep. There's a lot of strange things that we feel and that we've talked about on the podcast.
Yeah.
Just as a qualifier to everybody, every time I open my mouth, I'm like, this is going to sound really strange, but
just go with me here.
Yep, I'm going with you.
We didn't really have a lot of answers with my brother Aaron. We didn't know exactly what happened with him. And so we had we'd kind of practiced at not knowing all the details. So when they came to me and they said, we don't know what happened to your husband. Because Chris had been to a doctor. He was under a doctor's care. Like, he was doing all the things that he was supposed to do. He'd had all of the, the tests that you start doing when you get old and they check on things. And he'd had those done, and they were fantastic. Like, he had a clean bill of health. And so, it didn't make sense what we were seeing with our eyes after what we had seen on those medical reports.
Yeah.
And so when Aaron died, I really had to wrestle through, okay, do I really believe what I've been saying my whole life? Do I really believe that God is sovereign, that he is in control, that he knew this was going to happen from before Aaron was born? Did he truly know the number of Aaron's days? And so I had wrestled through all of that and decided, I really do believe this, because I see the things that God has gone before us and done. And I see the things that he's still doing. And I see the way that he is allowing us to, even through all of this, minister to others and help someone else.
Yeah.
And so I had wrestled through all of that over the last 2 years. And so as I'm sitting in the hospital room and I'm looking at Chris, and this does not make any sense. It doesn't make any sense. I still believe that God is sovereign, that God knew this, that God numbered Chris's days before he was ever born. And so that if God knew this, and if God put us together and brought us to this point, that he was also that he already had the details figured out.
Right.
He's already got it.
Right.
And no, it is not fun. And no, I don't want this. This is not what I want at all. And if I could change it, I would. But I can't. And it's his job and not mine. And so that's really the first thing that was like, oh, okay, I've already decided this. I've already been down this road, and I've already decided that God is in control, that he knows what he's doing, and I don't. And I have to figure out how I'm going to be okay with that, because I really am okay with that. I just have to figure out those details.
Yeah. Wow. You know, one of the things you're saying is that there's some pre-decisions for all of us that we make. You know, in a little bit, I want to talk about discipleship, because it's very much one of the things that you still do, and that he was very much a part of when it came to you. So it's a huge passion, I know, on your hearts. But part of discipleship, part of our growth, our sanctification, is making some pre-decisions, right? Training for the trial that you're not yet in, settling on certain things about the character and nature of God. And sometimes those things get settled in our hearts through difficult situations or pressurized situations. Sometimes they get settled as we just experience God and, through really monumental moments. Sometimes they get settled through his word, right? But many of us come to points where we go, wait a minute, what I'm saying I believe, do I really believe this? And a lot of times those critical junctures happen with pain, loss, intense pressure, transition, crisis, whatever that is, whatever you want to call it. And and what you're saying though is that you settle on this, the loss of your spouse, you can't compare it to the loss of a brother. It's very different, but it is extremely intense and it's a great loss, right? It's an extremely horrific loss. One that touches even closer, I think, sometimes than the loss of a sibling. Although, again, I want to say that those two there's different. And so this intense, great loss was already prepared for you by settling some of those terms with the Lord in this other loss. And so it's really interesting to me that that's part of the way God has allowed your story to play out, written your story, so that in a moment like this where you're going, we have no answers for why, zero answers. I mean, that is mind-boggling that the camera is scrambled in that moment, right? You're able to point to the character and nature of God still and say, no, I settled on who he is. I settled on what I believe about him. So this is not in flux. This is not shaken what I believe about him.
Right.
Man, that's powerful. That's powerful, Melissa.
Yeah. And it was a gift, honestly. I mean, I would never call my brother's death a gift, but what I learned through that and what I worked through with God through that prepared me and was a gift, because as I'm sitting there in the hospital and being asked to make decisions that no one should ever have to make, I didn't have to wrestle through that as well. That part was already settled and already done. And I had the peace of knowing that, God, you have numbered Chris's days. This is not mine to do. This is you.
Yeah. I think it's
and even.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, and even with my kids, they were 13 and 10 at the time. And because they had experienced the grief of the loss of their uncle, who they were not super close to, but still they loved him and he loved them.
Yeah.
They watched our whole family walk through that. And we had so many discussions about that. You know, why, how, and talking on a 13 and a 10-year-old level with them about their dad was, I don't want to say easier, that's the wrong word, but it was more familiar than if they had not experienced grief before.
Yeah. Yeah. You've said this a few times already in this conversation, that you've referenced the verse that that the Lord has not numbered his days, right? And I remember getting to that place. It's not the place you start, right? It usually isn't the place where when you lose somebody, you're like, well, the Lord has numbered their days, and you come to this place of peace, right? No, I mean, my wife was killed at 28 years old, and everything about that is senseless. It's premature. It's from the world standpoint, from natural worldly eyes, we go, okay, that should never be the case. That should not have been the case in her life. And on some level, absolutely, we can say that, right? That,
Yeah.
And of course we talk about all the time, the perpetrators of pain. So we've got lots of different reasons why in this fallen world that life is snuffed out or ended senselessly and premature, not the way God intended it to be. Right. However, Scripture also tells us that he knows the number of our days and that there is a fulfillment that happens in each one of our lives where an assignment that he's given us here on earth, that is our life, is done. And kingdom eyes can look at those situations and go, okay, when my time is done, the Lord's going to call me home. And it's going to be this celebration. On earth, it's a departing. In heaven, it's a celebration, right? On earth, it feels like this divorce or this severing. It's agonizing. But in heaven, it's this joining. It's this beautiful, it's a party, right? It's this well done, good and faithful servant. And that is the crazy dichotomy of living here on earth and yet being a part of the kingdom. That one can be very confusing. Psychologists call it cognitive dissonance, right? Two very diametrically opposed ideas or concepts that are existing at the same time in our soul, right? It can be very confusing, like how this and also this, and yet it also brings so much peace, right? It gives us the ability to walk through grief in a way that the world can't walk through grief.
Yeah. Yeah. Last week was actually Chris's birthday. And it was his second birthday since he's gone to heaven. And so I was talking about with the kids, I was like, what should we do to celebrate Daddy's birthday? And we just decided that we were just going to make cupcakes. Chris was a huge Dallas Cowboys fan. So my daughter wanted to make Dallas Cowboy cupcakes. And so that's what we did. And we just, did our thing. But it reminded me, she asked me, do they celebrate birthdays in heaven? And I said, well, I don't know. Like maybe because I feel like, God planned a day for you to arrive on this earth, just like he planned a day for you to leave it. And so maybe that's a big deal in heaven. Maybe it's not. That doesn't matter really right now because we are left with both the human and the holy right now. Like we have the awesome thing of knowing where Chris is and that he is whole and complete and thriving. And I mean, he's literally living his best life right now.
More alive than he's ever been.
We're left here with all the mess, with all of the human part of it that's contaminated by sin and death. And we kind of have to put up with that until God says it's our turn to go.
Yeah.
And it's not fun.
No.
But it's okay that it's not fun.
Yeah.
And we can just do the best that we can do, knowing that God is in control and he's got us.
That's so good, Melissa. You know, Chris was in the middle of writing a book. He was finishing his manuscript during this couple of weeks, or that week that you were gone, and when he passed, and you decided that you wanted to continue that. What led to that decision? How long after his passing did you decide that? Talk to me about that process a little bit.
I didn't really get much time. Chris, his deadline for the manuscript wasn't until September, but he had decided that he wanted to have it finished by this point in July. He wanted it done because we were gearing up for fall at church, and anybody who goes to church knows
It's part of a church staff.
School and you kick off the fall. Right. If you're part of a church staff, man, you're running fast. Yep. And so he really wanted to be done. And so I didn't know until later, but as I went back and looked in his emails, he had finished all of the edits that his editor had asked for and done. He had started the last chapter, but all the other stuff that he'd been emailing back and forth with on his editor, he'd completed and sent back just hours before he collapsed. And so as we're standing in the hospital, and it had become very clear that he was not going to wake up, standing there with my daughter Honor, who, if you have a kid like this, you know what pops into their head comes out of their mouth. And sometimes that's great, and sometimes it's not. Yeah. But she said, "Mom, who's going to finish Daddy's book?" And, as mom, I'm standing there with her, and I'm like, let's talk about that later. We'll figure that out. We don't have to do that right now.
Yeah.
And she turned and looked at me and she said, "Mom, you have to do it." And I was like, "Honor, let's talk about this later, please. Let's not do this right now." And she said, "No, Mama." She was very insistent. She said, "You have to finish Daddy's book."
Wow.
And I knew she was right. I knew that because of what I had done professionally in the past, I had the skills to do it. I didn't know if I had what it would take from me.
Right, emotionally, or
Yeah. But I also knew that in my Enneagram 8-ness that I wasn't
I always
really
wonder
sure if
when I
wanted...
talk to people, I'm like, I want to know what I'm always trying to guess throughout the entire conversation.
Yeah. I also knew in that 8-ness, I didn't want anybody else to have control over it. So it was one of those things that really was put in motion pretty quickly, that I think I may have kind of surprised the agent and the publishers when I emailed and said, "Hey guys, we're going to finish this and I'm going to do it, and you're stuck with me." Wow. So here we go. Buckle up.
Wow.
And they have all been so kind and gracious and sensitive through the whole process. But I don't think they didn't know what to do, because they'd never had this happen before. You know, we have most of a manuscript turned in, and then the author isn't here anymore. Like, what do we do? Right. So they've been wonderful in allowing me to just take it and run with it and say, "Hey, this is what we're going to do."
Wow. It's a beautiful thing, really. I mean, we all want, I would think, if we're intellectually honest, we all want to leave this earth with some kind of legacy. right? Some kind of thing that we've left behind, or people that we've left behind that bears testimony to a life well lived.
Yes.
And, and all of that, I mean, each person, it's suited to their gifts, right? So I'm a writer too. So when I think about like, okay, when I'm done in this world, when my assignment's done, I'm praying that I have multiple books or multiple pieces of things that can be left behind, because I read people who have gone before us, and I get encouragement, and I derive hope and faith from your C.S. Lewis and from your, right, you name a bunch of prolific ones, right?
Yeah.
But even like the lesser known names, where it's like, what a powerful thing that you've got this thing that you're leaving behind. And I think it's so much more beautiful that he had this pretty much all finished, and you decided to put the exclamation point on it and say, hey, we're going to finish this thing. And it became a cooperative. I mean, you talked about the beginning of this conversation, you guys were best friends. Who better, right? Some marriages, that's not the case. Some marriages, you're not best friends.
Yeah.
You're like, I love you to death do us part. I don't really like you, and I don't even really like hanging out with you. But you guys were just so knitted together that who better to be able to speak through that same thread, that same heart, on the topic that you guys were writing about. And what a powerful and beautiful thing, Melissa.
Yeah. It's been a huge blessing. And, as he was writing it, I had the ability and the privilege. We talked about it, and, he bounced ideas off back and forth, and he would send it to me. Hey, will you check this over? Will you read this? And so like, I'd already had my hands in it a little bit. So that when it came time to take the manuscript and to make some changes the editor wanted, to go back through and do the things you have to do when you take pieces and put them all together, that it was already familiar to me. And it was really sweet that I could pick that up and read it and hear his voice in my head, and know that everything that he said in this book was true and real, and not something made up or that he was just saying to put words on a page, that really was who he was, that he put in that book. Wow.
I have to imagine that was also very healing for you, to read his words, to take part in that.
Yeah, and one of the things in particular is that in his chapter on prayer, where he's talking about teaching your kids to pray, and how you pray, and then how you talk to your kids when your prayers are not answered the way you want them to be.
Wow.
When I got to that part, I was like, okay, you wrote this for our kids too, and you didn't even know it.
Yeah. Man. The book is very much a book about discipleship, or making disciple cycles, as you were kind of talking about, our disciples that makes it disciples. That's what he did as his job there at the church. He was, a discipleship pastor essentially, right? One of the things I tell my team, as we talk about what we do, as we try to put language to what we do, I tell my team, hey, we're a discipleship ministry. We're teaching people how to follow after Jesus. Now, we happen to intersect people in their trauma, in their tragedies, in their major life transitions, but that's just the entrance point, right? That's where people are coming into our ministry, but really our goal is to disciple people. And so I believe that some of the greatest discipleship happens in these moments of crisis and pain, because our ears are attuned to the Lord all of a sudden. We're desperate.
Yeah.
I'm curious, as you think about discipleship, it's been such a big part of your relationship with Chris, your story, your marriage together, your life work, his life work, and you overlay that with grief. What is that? How do you feel like those things intersect? And what have you experienced in terms of your own discipleship, your own relationship with Jesus, and then how you see grief inform that for other people as well?
One of the things that I have, because this book that we wrote called Write It on Their Hearts is about allowing God to write his word on the hearts of your kids. And so, because that's what he does.
Yeah.
It's him.
Right.
He does that, not us, right? We have to allow our kids to develop their own faith. They can't have ours and then go out in the world and can continue their relationship with the Lord.
Yeah.
Because the world will suck every drop of life out of them if they don't have that direct line to God.
Right.
So one of the things that I have thought about as we've gone through the last 13 months is, I'm discipling my kids because we're talking about the Bible. We're memorizing scripture. We're praying together. We're reading the Bible. Like, we're doing these things. Like, those things are happening. But I'm also discipling them in grief. I'm teaching them how to be okay when you're not okay.
Yeah.
How to give space to people when they're hurting. How to allow people to speak into your life when no one knows what to say. I'm not the best at that because as an 8, I like to know where we're going and be in charge of things. And I've just kind of thrown all of that to the wind, that is not happening. But I get to show my kids what it's like to depend on God when I don't know what's going on. And I don't know how many times my kids have walked into the kitchen and found me just crying while I'm cooking or, washing dishes or whatever. Wow. And they're like, "You okay?" "Yeah, but no, but it's fine." And they're like, "Okay." And, and then later we might talk about it and we might not. But showing them that it's okay to depend on God, even when we don't know what's going on, has been the biggest part of this for me personally.
Yeah. Wow. And that's what's so beautiful about discipleship is not something that you get out of a textbook, right? It's not something that you just learn right here cerebrally. Although God's word disciples us, it teaches us, right? But it's God's word applied, really, is what's most important. And I think about Jesus and his quote unquote discipleship techniques, right? He's the master to learn from in this because he created the first disciples. And Jesus was a rabbi. Rabbis teach through experience. They teach through object lessons. They'll stand somewhere, right? And they'll always, every time you see Jesus say something in scripture and he's like, it's like the flowers of the field. Well, flowers were right there. He'd be able to point to the flowers. A rabbi always teaches in a setting where he can point to whatever he's using as the object lesson. And so there's this experiential, visual type, immersive method of teaching. And what really is difficult to palate sometimes is that's the way God disciples us as well. Is these immersive experiences. And that's really, it's not because I feel like that he has some kind of sadistic, way of wanting to teach us. It's not that. It's because that's the only way we actually learn.
Yeah.
As human beings.
Yeah, we're hard-headed.
Yeah. It'd be great if he could just get up and lecture us and we'd be like, "Yep, got it. I know, right? I'm very wise now. I can, knowledge applied. Here we go." That's not usually the case. But I think it's beautiful that as you're doing this, as you're learning these things, as you're trying to figure out what it looks like to give grace in the midst of your own grief and to walk through this and be okay when you're not okay and all those things that you just said, you're showing your kids that. And you're not showing your kids that just by having conversations, although I'm sure you're having lots of conversations. You're showing your kids that by showing your kids that. More is, to be cliche, more is caught than it is taught.
Yeah.
So what's next? I know right now we talked a little bit on air where you're like, I'm kind of trying to figure out what I'm supposed to do, which you're 13 months out of this. That seems right and appropriate. There's no real standard timeline for how these things work, but it made sense to me when you said that, where you're like, I'm trying to, and we talk a lot about pain to purpose. How do we flesh this pain out into a purpose? What do you feel like is what are the things stirring in you right now?
I really have no idea. But I never intended to have my name on the front of a book as an author. That was Chris's thing. I was going to sit beside him while he did the podcast interviews and the promos for the book. And I was going to go with him when he spoke at conferences and things like that he was already doing, but that he was going to have the opportunity to do for this book. Like that's not what I ever planned to do. And so because there are so many things that I've been doing the last 13 months that I never planned to do, I'm just kind of at the point where I'm like, okay, God, I don't know what I'm doing next. But what you have taught me is everything's up for negotiation. Everything's on the table. Like if, a little over a year ago, if somebody had said, hey, are you gonna, be talking to Davey on the Nothing is Wasted podcast? I would say, you are out of your mind. Wow. You're crazy. And so here I am because God's brought me here, but he didn't bring me here all at once.
Yeah.
It's taken us some time for him to move us and move me to the point where I am now. And so I don't expect all of that to happen overnight.
That's right.
And I'm here and we're just doing the next thing.
Yeah.
And, just praying and ready for God to tell me what that next thing is.
Yeah. Wow. Well, as difficult as it can seem in the midst of grief, you still are grieving and you're going to continue to grieve, right? I mean, we all know that. We've talked about that a ton, that there's no time limit on your grief. It's not all of a sudden you wake up one day and you're like, okay, I'm done grieving. No, it happens in waves. It happens in cycles. You're going to continue to grieve. But in the midst of all of this, my encouragement to you would be find joy and contentment as this thing unfolds, because it's going to be amazing to see where God takes you with this, Melissa.
Yeah.
Because he always turns this stuff around. And it might not be in our timing, might not be the way that we expected it to be, but the amount of pain, the amount of grief that you've walked through, you better believe he's got a plan to take this. And my favorite phrase now, I had a friend say this to me, he will weaponize this against the enemy. And when my friend said that to me, he's like, man, Davey, it's just like God to weaponize what the enemy does to his people against the enemy. And I was like, I like that phrase. And I know as an Enneagram 8, you like that phrase as well, to think about all this pain as being bottled up as a weapon against the enemy, to really eliminate the work that he is trying to do, and really shed light on the kingdom of light and God's work here in this world. And so it's awesome to see what you're doing with this. How can we connect with you and how can we follow what's going on? Obviously we want to make sure that we pick up the book, and I want to make sure that we put all those resources right here on the show notes and on our web page. But what can we do to follow along with what you're doing?
So you can find everything about the book on our website, which is the same as the book title, writeitontheirhearts.com. You can find our socials there. We've got free resources and downloads there. And if you want to find me on Instagram, I'm with the Swains on Instagram.
Awesome. Well, Melissa, this has been a joy. Thank you so much for spending time with us and for sharing your story. And I know that God's got so much more that he's writing in your life and in your kids' lives. And so thank you for just sharing with us vulnerably and authentically.
Thanks for having me.
Hey friend, if you liked this episode, be sure to like and subscribe so that you can stay in the loop every time Nothing is Wasted releases a piece of content here on this YouTube channel.